Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Well, hello there. So good to see Morgan Streetman in studio today. Pat George is here. I'm Roxanne Wilder, and we're all surviving the heat quite nicely.
Well, we got to wear our masks everywhere now, apparently. Walking around the building with the masks on. Tell you, don't wear the mask, you get chastised. Saw that today already, Pat George.
Yeah, and the one I have, as a matter of fact, I put it on now. You can still hear me pretty good. It's really not a real good mask, but it works.
It's a face covering, right? That's the new word for it. We see everywhere face covering.
Right.
Yeah, I brought my little thing that they gave me at Publix when I went by Publix on Friday, and they freaked out because I walked in without a mask on. Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah.
You don't have a mask on, sir. Sorry. Do you have one for me? Well, anyway, I'll tell you, a lot of stuff to get into today. We got an exciting guest coming up, second segment. It's going to be a lot of fun, so
Edie
stick around.
Darling. Edie Darling. She's a motivational speaker, a spiritual advisor in law enforcement. She's got something really cool that she's working on. So
Cool. Well, and also some good news last week. Wanted to share with folks because we've been covering this story for months and even years now, which is the General Flynn story. Of course, last week, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals finally ruled on that petition for writ of mandamus. And I say finally, they moved pretty quick. I mean, there's no doubt about it, especially for courts. They moved quickly. But they finally ruled on that, and they granted the petition for the writ of mandamus. So they entered the writ of mandamus essentially to tell the lower court, the trial court that Judge Sullivan is in charge of, that they have to dismiss the charges against General Flynn.
And as soon as I heard that, I thought of you immediately, and I said, he has a smile from ear to ear.
I really did. A friend of mine actually saw it first because, of course, I'm working during the day, and I try to keep up with the news, but I don't just sit around and just only watch the news. But a friend of mine texted me and said, basically, General Flynn is going to be free. And so I was really excited to see that. And I went, and it's so interesting because a couple of things. One, the ruling on it was a 2-1 vote between the judges. So you had two judges. They have a 3-judge panel that decides these things in the appellate court, typically. And then it can get also bounced back to have all the judges on the appellate court decide it. And that's called an en banc review. But initially it gets decided by a panel of 3, unless there's some other reason to go ahead and do it en banc from the get-go. But initially it gets decided by a panel of 3, and 2 of the 3 judges voted in favor of issuing the writ of mandamus. One of the 3 judges actually voted against it. Now, it was such a clear rule of law, it's almost hard to believe that one of the judges voted against it. But he did, and of course he was the appointee by President Obama, Judge Robert Wilkins, who voted against it. But if you want to take just a few minutes and go through and read the order itself, read the opinion that was issued by Judge Naomi Rayo and joined by Judge Henderson, it's pretty interesting because she lays out the legal reasoning behind the decision, which is essentially that the court cannot encroach, like we told you, on the prosecutorial discretion of whether or not to proceed with the prosecution. So what they talk about is there are cases because, what the other side of the argument has been saying is that this is not an absolute right of the prosecutors to dismiss the charges and that the court has some review function in this process, right? We've heard that. It depends on how closely you followed the story, but that was the counter argument, that the court has a review process that it can go through. And what would be the point of a review process if they're required to rubber stamp it, right? Mm-hmm. What would be the point? But she actually goes through all of that and points out where the review might come into play. And it's what we've told you before. And it is where the prosecution is wanting to dismiss the charges, but the defense doesn't want the charges dismissed. And why, you might say, well, gosh, when would that ever happen? That somebody who's a defendant doesn't want the charges dismissed. Well, the situation would be if they're dismissing and then they're refiling.
Oh, I see.
Separately.
Okay.
And so basically they're filing, taking it up to trial, and then dismissing it, and then refiling a new case.
Okay.
And then taking it up to trial and then dismissing it because they don't actually have the facts to succeed at trial, but they're using it as a form of harassment of the defendant. And that's what's talked about in the case law. And that would be a legitimate reason for the court to not grant a motion to dismiss by the prosecution. But in this case, as she lays out, both the prosecution and the defense are on the same side. And by the way, the prosecution actually came forward and said there are some facts that, go into this. It's not just, we're deciding to drop the charges for political reasons or just because we're tired of this or we want to. They're saying we actually looked into this. We had an independent, U.S. attorney come in from Missouri and look into this whole situation. And the government didn't do what it was supposed to do with respect to General Flynn. It didn't give him that exculpatory evidence, the Brady evidence that it's supposed to give him, including all these notes that are coming out now, things that tend to indicate exculpatory, that tends to indicate that he didn't commit a crime. Also, the government takes the position that any misrepresentations that he may have made in his discussions with the FBI, and there's really a question as to whether he made any misrepresentation or not, because the agents that interviewed him didn't think he was lying to them. But remember, it was a game of gotcha. Mm-hmm. They went in there with the transcripts, and there are, of course, the notes of the meeting ahead of time where it says, do we try to get him to lie so we can get him fired? Remember that?
Yes.
Okay.
Who wrote those notes? Do we remember who wrote those notes? I forget. They were certain investigators.
I forget if that was, I don't want to say because there's a bunch of names. It was one of the FBI guys. I don't remember if that was Priestap or
right.
Pientka. I know it wasn't Strzok, but anyway, it was one of the people that was involved in the situation who was basically talking about whether or not, we want to get him to lie and try to get him fired from his job, which is ultimately what happened. He did get fired. Some question as to whether he lied. Now, of course, the important thing is that it has to be a misstatement about a material fact. And that's what the government was saying. This wasn't a material fact because we already had the transcript. Mm-hmm. So we don't need General Flynn's testimony today about what he talked about with Ambassador Kislyak on the phone, right? We have the transcript. There's no need for him to recall as best he can today. And, if he doesn't get it right, somehow it misleads us. No, we have the transcript. So the government had come forward to the court itself and said, look, there's a lot of problems with the way that we pursued this prosecution. We have a lot of problems here, and we think given these problems and the review that's been conducted, the best thing for everybody is just to dismiss these charges. We know he pleaded guilty, but of course he's got filings that says, look, I pleaded guilty under pressure, and it was pressure that was put on my son. They were talking about indicting my son. So either you plead guilty, and you as parents, y'all can identify with this concept, the concept of the self-sacrifice of parents. Whether you did it or you didn't do it, if you could protect your child by pleading, or it's obviously not a child anymore, but your son or daughter, by pleading to something, there a lot of parents out there would do that, I think. Mm-hmm. And folks, if you, of course, maybe if you don't have a good relationship with your son or daughter, you say, I'm not doing anything for my son or daughter. But your basic parents who've had a good family relationship and nothing has happened to fracture that relationship in life, your parents are going to sacrifice for the children. And that's what he said that he did. And that's where he said, look, I feel like I was pressured into this. I don't feel like I did it. I didn't do what they say I did. And you didn't give me the exculpatory evidence that would have helped me to know that. It's not, see, this is the thing. General Flynn never even got the transcript until it was released now. So he never even knew what was actually on there. So he didn't know if he lied or didn't lie. Of course, you say lied or misstated or didn't misstate, right? Because he didn't know what was in the transcript and didn't remember. And they say he was having, dozens of telephone calls every day during that transition period. And you could just imagine how many different calls he had with how many different people, and they probably all kind of ran together. It'd be hard to remember.
So is it
weeks
over,
later.
And is he done? Will he be brought back? Can it happen again? Does he have to continue to pay attorneys?
Well, it was interesting because a couple of things have happened that I thought were interesting. One, the amicus that the judge had appointed, Judge Sullivan, remember, had appointed an amicus to argue against the government's motion in which the defense had joined. So the amicus, that ex-federal judge John Gleason, he actually filed a paper and said, hey, one of my review papers is all ready to be filed. My brief is done. It's ready to be filed. But in light of the ruling of the appellate court, granting the writ of mandamus, I'm seeking guidance from the court as to whether or not I should go ahead and file this today because today's the deadline. And what happened is Judge Sullivan entered an order. And you might say, well, why doesn't the writ of mandamus just deal with that? And that is because there are time periods built into these things. So there's 10 days before it goes into effect. Also, there are additional review processes. So they could apply for, as we mentioned earlier, an en banc review of it. So these things could slow it down. It could allow these proceedings to continue. But Judge Sullivan did the right thing here, I think, and he entered an order staying any further proceedings by the amicus. So it looks like this has done it.
And we are back on the Morgan Streetman Show. We have a special guest joining us today. Her name is Edie Darling. She's a motivational speaker, a spiritual advisor. She's in law enforcement. She's also an author, has a new book out. And the special thing about Edie, Morgan, I was telling you a little bit about her during the break, is she's got this position, Ambassador of Peace, that she's working towards. And with this, she can offer so much guidance and shed light on what's happening in our society today. She's got these great perspectives that she can bring. So we're going to introduce her right now. Hello, Edie. How are you?
Good morning, Roxanne. How are you this morning?
I am doing great. So great to hear your voice.
Same here, my sister.
Good morning, Edie. It's good to hear from you.
Good morning, Morgan. How are you this morning?
I am great. I'm so glad to hear from you. I'm so glad you're on the show. I'm so excited to hear some of your personal story because it is, I tell you, it's one of the most inspiring and unique stories that I have heard recently in this whole process. And you're just a gem of a person. And I'm so glad you could be here to share that with our listeners.
Well, thank you so much. I'm honored.
I want to start with the law enforcement part of your background because this is something you aspired to when you were growing up. You first started to have that dream. So if you can kind of take us down the road of how that came to be.
Yes, Roxanne. So when I was younger, my two brothers were robbed outside of our home. And so I grew up in a community where law enforcement and community were not friends. So my mom and my dad shared with us their experiences that they saw in their generation, and they passed those visions on to us, so to speak. And growing up in the community, I got to see it from my own eyes. And it wasn't a good vision. Mm-hmm. It wasn't good at all. And so when my mom said that she had to call the police when my brothers got robbed, I was like, Mom, no, don't you remember all the things you just told us?
Mm-hmm.
You know? Mm-hmm. So, but when the officer came to our home, Roxanne
mm-hmm.
and Morgan, he treated our family with the utmost respect. He saw us, first of all, as human beings. He saw my brothers as victims. He did not treat them less than. And when he, let me say this too, my mother invited him to our dinner table. So you have to understand, only people that got to sit at the dinner table were individuals that my mother felt safe with, that those were conversations that we would have. Mm-hmm. And so when he got ready to walk out of the door, I was like, oh my gosh. So he shook my hand. And when he shook my hand, I felt a transference of power, so to speak. But really what it was a torch that he passed. Mm-hmm. And I told my mother after he walked out of the door, I said, Mom, I want to do what he just did. I want to be a police officer. My mom said, no, baby, you want to be a nurse. Mm-hmm. I said, no, Mama, I want to be a police officer. Mm-hmm. He changed my life. And because of that, it changed the whole trajectory of my life. Yeah. And so I've committed to serving the people in our community.
That is such a powerful story. And, it got me thinking the other day. I saw something on social media about, there are so many positive interactions that citizens have with law enforcement. And you just described a very powerful, positive one, obviously. Personally, I can think about the last time I had interaction with law enforcement. Sorry to take it down a notch, but it was when my father passed, and it was a police officer who called me. It was a police officer who met me at my parents' door. And without that police officer, I could not have gotten through those moments. And so I think so many times we have, certain images of what police officers are doing or not doing, and yet there are so many things that we need you all for in desperate times. And so I think that you have the ability, like no one else, to convey these important messages, and you want to do so with this role of Ambassador of Peace. Can you tell us about that, Edie, what you're striving to do and what you envision?
Yes. So, first of all, as an ambassador of peace, it is supporting the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as defined in the Constitution of the United States of America. And as an ambassador of peace, I cannot and I will not turn a blind eye to the inequitable disparities of urgent crises critically facing our nation, communities, and communities abroad. And helping people to understand that what oppresses one oppresses us all. And for this reason, I will function as a citizen to the world, providing support and expertise as situations arise, such as what we are seeing today with the pandemic and the civil unrest and the peaceful protest, right? By establishing roundtables of peace, just as what you are doing right now, with those impacted by injustices on a quest for peace, and that they know that they will be heard. Mm-hmm. And that's important. Yeah, that people are actually heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the themes that I've heard repeated is that theme of empathy and sympathy. You know, we don't always necessarily agree on what the right fixes are for some of the problems, but recognizing the humanity in other people and not falling into these sort of racial divisions of, oh, well, you know, this is a black problem or a white problem, or it's a black church or a white church or a black community or a white community. I mean, these are human beings, and I know I've heard you talk about that in some of the interviews that you've done, but tell us a little bit more about how you're helping to spread that message to everybody that you're coming in contact with.
Well, first of all, we have to see each other as brothers and sisters. We have to see each other as one body, for we are one body. We are one spirit. We are baptized into one body. The body does not consist of just one member. We are many members, but yet one body. Mm-hmm. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor can the hand say to the feet, I have no need of you. God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all members suffer. If one member is honored, all members shall rejoice together. And that is the problem. We do not see each other as brothers and sisters in humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. Very powerful. And Edie, I've seen that last time I caught up with you, I was able to look at some of those letters that you've received from government officials and from people around the state and around the country that they've sent letters to the president requesting you be in this position. What are the next steps? What needs to happen? What can our listeners do?
So, Roxanne, we did a campaign back in September to get 100,000 signatures to the White House. That the people's voice is heard to say why an ambassador of peace is needed now today more than any. And I always said we don't need 100,000 signatures. We just need one voice. That person who's willing to say, you know what, I believe in the message of peace, and I believe that the people need to see a face who recognizes and is recognized as the voice of peace for all of humanity, and that voice of peace is Edie Darling. And so that person has the ability to pick up the phone, ring, 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 and say, this is the time right now for this to be heard. Because you know what's so interesting, Roxanne? Mm-hmm. When our Catholic counterparts, sisters and brothers look to that voice of peace, who do they look to? Everybody knows that voice of peace for them is the Pope, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So why is it that our those who are not Catholic cannot find a voice who they can look at? We need to have that voice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a good comparison.
We need to know that there is that person that they can say, that person right there is our ambassador of peace, and that person will fight for peace all over the world.
And fighting for peace, it's so important that you're doing that, but also, I mean, your background is such that you can bridge the gap between citizens who are unhappy and need to be heard and law enforcement who need to be heard as well, because I think that's getting lost right now quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. It is. Just recently I just had a conversation with someone, and it was one of my fellow brothers in law enforcement, and they said to me, I feel like throwing in the towel.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, whoa. I said, this is not the time to throw in the towel, brother. This is the time that you need to stand up and be who you have been called to be. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
Mm-hmm.
So we need those peacemakers, those who choose to be the dipper, those who have been called to make a change and be the voice of change and going in and impacting individuals who don't look like them.
Mm-hmm.
Become the sheroes and the heroes of our next generation of individuals who need to know that there is hope and that you are not out here to harm me, but you are out here to protect me because I am a human being, first of all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Edie, we love talking with you. Thank you so much. Hey, I want to ask you, we've got less than a minute left, but you've also got a book, The Time Is Now, Awaken Your Dormant Gifts. Where can we find that book?
On on the internet. Just go to the internet. Just look up The Time Is Now by Edie Darling.
That's great. It's been so wonderful talking with you, as always, and just love your spirit, Edie. Love what you're doing.
Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us, Edie. I'm going to go out there. Is that petition still out there? Because I'd be signing that right away.
Well, you know what, Morgan? We may kick it back off, but again, it only takes one voice, and let that voice be heard.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much, Edie. It was great to hear from you. What a wonderful story, and we hope we could talk to you again sometime soon.
Yes, for
You
sure.
will.
We'll be back with more on the Morgan Streetman Show. Sit tight. Here we are on the Morgan Streetman Show. Roxanne Wilder with you as well, and Pat George. And we just spoke with Edie Darling, and she's offering so much wisdom and advice on how we can get to a place in our country where we have peace, because it's lacking right now. We can see that there are viral videos and things happening all over the web that are going to make you kind of depressed about where we are.
Yeah, if you woke up and looked at Twitter or other places this morning, I'll tell you saw a video of some folks out in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw that video, Pat. You didn't see it by the look on your face.
I've seen a lot this morning, so tell me which one this one is.
The one with the husband and wife outside their mansion, and the husband's got an AR-15. The wife has a little silver pistol. You should pull this up, because what happened in this particular neighborhood is it's a private neighborhood, totally private. It's gated, and it's a private street. Apparently, these are some of the prominent old homes in St. Louis, Missouri. So these are, it'd be kind of like our Bayshore Boulevard, with some of these historic old homes on it, and maybe even more so because, these are some real mansions. Anyway, these protesters from the BLM movement come through the gate. It's marked as private residence only. It is not a public street, but they open the gates up and they start pouring into this private neighborhood. Well, meeting them ready to go is a guy and his wife. And again, the guy's got his AR-15 out. And a funny story about those two as well. I don't know them personally, but they are trial lawyers in Missouri, which I think is sort of interesting. So they tend to represent the injured. And most people who are trial lawyers, not all people, but I would say the vast majority of people that are personal injury trial lawyers fall on the very liberal part of the spectrum. So they would be very pro BLM and these liberal Marxist movements that are ongoing.
I would expect those trial attorneys, rather than have their guns out there, they should have some paperwork. Hey, have you been injured in an auto accident?
Come on by and sign up, folks. We got a whole bunch of new clients. That's right. But anyway, it's quite an interesting series of videos that you can go out there and see. I would be quite fearful for these two, because no matter how good of a shot you are, if you've got a whole crew of people about to rush you, which is basically what it looks like. It's a highly tense situation.
Looks like he's guarding the White House.
It's a nice home. I'm telling you, Pat George. They've done well for themselves. Obviously, the plaintiff's personal injury business is lucrative, at least for these two in St. Louis.
I couldn't believe, when I looked at that house, too, I was like, it doesn't even look real. Like, this video to me doesn't look real. It looks staged. I know that it's probably real because crazy things happen in this world, but it looks almost hokey.
Well, and it could be, I guess, okay, conspiratorially, could it be staged for effect? I guess so, but after I saw it this morning, one of the things that I did is I went and I checked out their law firm.
I bet you did.
And I checked out the law firm website, and I checked out their reviews on Google and Yelp. And, I mean, they're going to be hurting for business, I would say, because they got about 1,000 one-star reviews today from people all about this situation. And then other people, you can tell that it's really about this situation, but they're saying things about the quality of their work. But you could see the time that these reviews are posted, and they're all posted approximately 8 to 10 hours ago. And so, obviously they're arising from this particular incident. But the point of mentioning it right now is just how disturbing it is, because how close we're getting as a society to some kind of violence, which is really a sad and disturbing development in our civil discourse. We can't even hardly call it civil discourse anymore, right? I mean, now we have to, it's almost uncivil discourse that we're having with each other, and this sort of, countervailing threats of violence. We're going to come bust up your house. Oh, no, you're not. I'm going to shoot you up. And, I mean, that's now the level to which we've gotten in this country. And whose hands is this playing into? I mean, who is bettered by this? Are any of the people, like Edie was saying, we're all part of the same group here, the humanity. We're all human beings, and we're all tied together, whether we like it or not, in the same group. And so, here we are fighting against each other. And who's bettered by that? Who wins in these kinds of situations? Who wins here?
Nobody.
Nobody wins, Pat
Nobody.
George. Nobody wins. And so we're going to see more and more of this. I'm disturbed that not just in this particular incident, because these things can arise sort of quickly with these mobs moving around, sort of almost a flash mob concept. You don't know where they're going to be.
And it can happen at any intersection, anytime, any place.
Yeah.
You almost don't want to go out on the roads.
Well, I mean, we heard a recent 911 call of a lady who was in her car. I forget what town it was in, but she was surrounded by rioters, and they were jumping on her car. She called the police department, called 911, and 911 says, we've been told to stand down. Call City Hall. You got a problem, ma'am? Call City Hall. We've been told not to do any law enforcement. So here she is. She has her kids in the car. She says, and my daughter, I think it was her daughter, my daughter's in the car with me. And they're jumping on the hood of my car. What do I do? What do I do? Because, what do you do in that situation? I mean, I know a lot of people, you're going to be tempted to put your foot on the gas, right? Because your car is your only defense in that case. And you got to try to get out of there. And it's, oh, my gosh, you ran over these people. Well, I mean, come on. What are you supposed to do? Are you just supposed to sit there and they smash your car in and smash your head in? As they've done before to people like Reginald Denny, now we're going back 30 years, but, these situations where people are getting pulled out of their cars and having their heads bashed in, this is a scary situation. And how is that how we're interacting with each other? I mean, how are we going to come back together in our country and move forward when we've got these kind of incidents starting to happen and starting to spread? So it's a very sad development for our country. I don't think it bodes well for the future. I think it should be pretty obvious there are people that are trying to fan these flames of division. We've talked about it here on the show before, concept of divide and conquer. Why are they trying to break us down into all these different identities, ethnic and racial identities? Why? I mean, like Edie Darling would say, why aren't we all just human beings? Instead, no, I'm black or I'm white, and you're not. We're different. You don't have the same experience as me, and we can't find a way to come together because of that difference. And of course, it's all created in our own minds.
When in reality, if we all just think about the fact, hey, we're all brothers and sisters. Let's see each other as human beings and try to move forward and have empathy and have sympathy.
Well, what scares me is the age of the protesters that want to abolish the system. At this age, it's going to be around a while in their minds that this is not right. And what do they want to change it to?
Yeah. They don't know.
I just think that there are some very important values that we've kind of make us successful and make things happen. One is hard work, and one is having kindness and respect for other people. and one is having pride in yourself and your country. And the people who are part of some of these movements, they, like you said, the ones that are at that level of anarchy and the ones that want to break the system down, they are not interested in any of those things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I believe you bring back the draft. Bring that back, and a little bit of respect can be taught,
Well, I don't know. I think, unfortunately, I think it has to start earlier in life. That's a lot of the problem that we have.
Yeah, you're right. It's
the
probably too late.
inculcation of values has to begin when the person is a child. It has to start. By the time a child is age 6 or 7, it's almost getting to be too late to begin that process of inculcating the values into the next generation. So it starts with a strong family system that has values and passes those values like you're talking about. And we all have to decide in life. We all have to decide, what do I value in life? What is it that I value? And you have to make your decision, and you have to pick something. You can't be ambivalent about it. You have to pick something, and you have to stand up for it and try and get others to share your values. And we better start doing this quick. And that's, we loved Edie Darling's spirit, such a sweet spirit, such a needed spirit right now in our culture, somebody to stand up and try to bring people together and build bridges instead of creating more division. And we look to our media, and all they're doing is putting out stories that are going to divide us. And I see these stories all over the place, and they're designed to inflame the passions and feelings on both sides and turn both sides against each other. And, of course, this is designed with an end in mind, which is to take down the system and the values that have existed in this country, like we've talked about. And that's really a sad thing. And it's sad that the media is not just participating in it, but they're one of the leaders of this movement, this divide and conquer movement. And, of course, you see, it's, the hypocrisy. I mean, you look at how our leaders respond to some of this, and the hypocrisy is just stunning, right? Because it's a set of rules for thee, but not for me, right? That's what they say to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so, for example, you've got the Minneapolis City Council voting to defund the Minneapolis Police Department, right? Then what else do? They don't leave it at just that, right? They, for themselves, arrange private security paid for by the citizens of Minneapolis. So the city council gets rid of the police. No police for you. But you know what? I'm going to have you, the taxpayer, pay for some private security for me. And guess what? It's $4,500 a day. That adds up pretty fast, right? That's going to be a budgetary hit pretty quickly there at 45, basically $5,000 a day for private security for 3 of these Minneapolis City Council members. And, of course, they all have their reasons. They all have their excuses. Oh, well, I've received death threats from white nationalists, et cetera, et cetera. Well, yeah, welcome to the world. I mean, look what happened to these people in St. Louis. Look what's happening to other people in your community in Minneapolis. Other people are being the victims of violent crime, and they're receiving different threats that could make them feel like they're going to be victimized in some way. But you're getting rid of the police for them. I say if you're going to make rules like that, you need to live by it. You want to get rid of the police, you don't get private security. You're on your own, just like everybody else in your community. You're on your own. But it's just a shocking level of hypocrisy from the leadership in a situation like that.
How can they get away with I mean,
how can they get away?
How can you, in good faith, go out and say, yeah, this is what we're going to do, but I'm good because I've got my security team, so
they just don't care. And it's like this in every communist regime. This is exactly what happens in communist regimes around. I mean, this is the story of the 20th century and communism, right? There is a ruling class, and you're not in it. You know, members of the proletariat rise up. You've got nothing to lose but your chains. No, that's false. You're going to keep your chains. You are. You're going to keep all of the disadvantages that you've got under the current system, and even more are going to be added to you. And then the leaders who talked a good game at the beginning, just like Castro did. Castro was talking about Bautista's been in too long. And then he stayed in for, 60 or more years? Way longer. They're a bunch of hypocrites.
Back on the Morgan Streetman Show, we're always trying to keep up with all the news that's going on. You do so much work to prepare, Morgan, and then breaking news happens. So
Middle of the show.
Middle of the show. We've got to address this.
Well, we warned you about this when we told you this was coming. The Supreme Court has now struck down that Louisiana law requiring abortion providers to have admission privileges at local hospitals. And, of course, Chief Justice John Roberts joins the so-called liberal wing of the court in the 5-4 decision striking down the Louisiana law. And, of course, I was just talking about this with somebody. During this entire period, it's amazing that abortion clinics have been kept open as an essential service. Abortion clinics. And, of course, if we were really to want to get into the history of Planned Parenthood, you'd very quickly find that Margaret Sanger was going around meeting with and preaching, essentially not preaching like a preacher, but just preaching to the crowd. And it was a lot of KKK groups that she would go and meet with, because the plan was we're going to put these abortion clinics in the minority neighborhoods so we don't have an overflow of minority children. And the subtext is, because they can't control themselves, they're having too many children, and they're going to outbreed the white population. And this is all said. You can go back and read some of her speeches, some of the letters that she wrote. This is all public knowledge as to this is what Planned Parenthood is really about. It's about eugenics. And that persists today. So in this period where, we're now trying to grapple with some racial issues, the one thing we can't do is shut down the abortion clinics. That's for sure. But now we wanted to talk just a little bit about our local interest story today, because we have a couple of those. I don't know if you heard, but, because things seem to be changing a little bit with Florida's coronavirus policies. And Vice President Mike Pence was actually coming to the state on a bus tour. He's going to do an event in Lake Wales and I think do a few other campaign stops, doing kind of a bus tour through the state of Florida. He's now canceled that because of the situation in Florida with the coronavirus and the number of new cases that are happening. Now, he's still going to come to Florida, but he's going to come just for the purposes of meeting with Governor DeSantis. So, I don't think that bodes particularly well for our reopening plans, because it seems like maybe something is going awry with that. And if you just saw on Friday, they shut the bars down again. Now they say bars, again, cannot serve on-premises alcohol. Now, thankfully, you could still get your alcohol to go from the bar. But, who wants to pay bar prices for to-go alcohol, right? If you're going to get your alcohol to go, just go to the liquor store, right, Pat George?
That's what I do.
Buy in bulk. Why buy one drink at a time? So, we don't know how long that restriction is going to last, but that being put back into place, to me, is indicative, do the authorities, because at least, and maybe this is not true, but I've got to think that the Florida authorities are not, trying to crash the economy for purposes of making sure President Trump can't win re-election, right? That can't be what Governor DeSantis is up to. So they must know something about the spread of coronavirus, that maybe things are getting a little bit out of control. I don't know. There's some reason they've shut these bars down again.
And shut the beaches in Miami.
And shut the beaches. It's a little unsettling.
But as of right now, the beaches are open in Pinellas County for 4th of July weekend.
Well, for as of right now. Exactly.
Yes, I think we're going to be surprised by that.
And the other thing that we're seeing now is this push for masks. Private businesses are wanting you to wear the mask inside. Some of our cities and towns in this area even have mask ordinances
a lot of them do.
In place
in
now.
Mm-hmm.
And so is this something that's coming? We hear talk on the national level, by Nancy Pelosi and others, that there should be some kind of a nationwide mask mandate. So is that coming soon? And, of course, I say masks. They're calling them face coverings now. If you notice, and all the legalese is all face coverings, not masks. And I don't know if the difference there is just so you can wear a bandana or a neck gaiter like you've got on, Pat George. There's other ways to cover your face. I was almost thinking of one of those I Dream of Jeannie little things, to cut keep the airflow going. But anyway, changes are afoot. Something's going on with the coronavirus, and we'll be watching that. We know you'll be watching it too. And, of course, Now, speaking of changes afoot, I mean, so many things in our country seem to be changing so rapidly, and not just things like temporary mask orders, but literally the fabric of our civic society is being ripped apart. Our institutions are being changed. Our values are being changed, whether we like it or not. And one of the institutions that we see that's being changed potentially, and this has never happened before, but last week the Congress, so just the House of Representatives, not the Senate yet, but the House of Representatives voted, passed a bill, and they said, now, of course, it's got to be passed by the Senate also, and then it had to be signed by the president. So understand what we're saying here. But they passed legislation to make Washington, D.C. a state. I mean, you talk about a change. I mean, there's some reason, right, that Washington, D.C., the federal district, was set up not to be a state, right? I mean, was there any reason behind any of the structure of our country or the Constitution, or was it all just kind of like words thrown onto a page just because, hey, we needed something, we got to add something in writing, so we just threw it together? There was no plan behind it. There's no reason for it, right? Mm-hmm. But here we are without any good reason. We're saying, hey, you know what? Let's just change that. Let's just change that. It's kind of like when they changed the vote for senators to be a popular vote within the state when, senators originally were elected by the state legislatures, not by the citizens directly. And they said, well, that's not right. That's not democracy. Whatever it was they said, and they got people to make that change. And that's been a significant change that has impacted the structure of government, the separation of powers, the reason that these things were set up the way that they were to have these sort of counterbalanced interests in government that kind of fight against each other, essentially to keep the government from being able to do too much because there are counterbalanced interests fighting against each other over these issues. When I say fighting, I don't mean actual fighting. I just mean, competing with each other for the exercise of the power. And this was important. And we've heard this over the last, 6 or 7 years over the debate about the Electoral College, right? Or the direct election. Oh, why should we have the Electoral College? It's not right. It's not democracy. Well, there's a lot of good reasons behind it. We don't have enough time left in this show to tell you that, all the reasons. But trust me, the Electoral College isn't just words thrown onto a page. They didn't just cut and paste that off the internet because somebody else had an Electoral College and we just figured, makes sense, what the heck, let's just throw it in there. And the same thing, D.C. was not set up as an actual state for a very good reason. It's the seat of the federal government. Now, the Democrats want to make it a state. Can you imagine why that might be? I mean, can you even come up with that, right? Why might that be? How close is the Senate, right? You add a state, you're going to add more people to the House of Representatives, and D.C., by the way, votes like 90% or better for Democrats. So you're guaranteed you're going to add representatives for the Democrats, but more importantly, you're going to add 2 new U.S. senators, and you're guaranteed they're going to be Democrats. That's the whole reason they're doing that. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.